Okay, hi everybody. Good to see you all on this rainy, chilly day in Georgia, but as we were just saying, not as bad as in some other areas of the country. And I'd like to welcome you to Andalusia Institute's book discussion group, where we talk about all things Flannery O'Connor. And tonight we will be talking about A View of the Woods. Keep in mind, this is a taped recording. And so if you feel uncomfortable being seen, then don't let your face be seen if you don't like that. And we'll keep you muted. But if you have a question, either write it in the chat or sort of wave your hand to me, and I will call on you, and we'll get you into the discussion. But this is part of an ongoing series, and we have March coming up, which is always a special month in our O'Connor studies, because it's Flannery O'Connor's birthday. So Thursday, the 2nd of March, we're going to have Eric Bennett, who is both a creative writer and a O'Connor scholar, talk about, and what his scholarship has been on is writing programs and how O'Connor has affected them. And he's written a comic novel called The Big Enough Lie. And in one of his cohort at Providence College, a fellow professor, Allison Esbach, who just wrote a book called The Adults. And so they will be talking about Flannery O'Connor as an influence on creative writing and the way that has occurred. Then, of course, we have our always much preferred monthly discussion by Dr. Gentry, and this will be on Greenleaf on Thursday, 3/18 at either 4:30 or 7. And then on Thursday, March 25th, which is Flannery O'Connor's birthday, from 11 to 12, we'll have a virtual tour of the museum where there's a special display on Madame O'Connor, Commander of the House. And then from 6 to 7, there'll be a panel on motherhood and Flannery O'Connor. Some of the folks who will be part of that are here right now. So we have Dr. Monica Miller, Dr. Bruce Gentry, and Dr. Claire Kahane and Dr. Jordan Kofer. We'll talk about sort of the motherhood aspects of Flannery O'Connor, both in the fiction and sort of in her life with Ms. Regina. So with no further ado, and again, as a reminder, if you have a question, just let me know in the chat. We'll turn it over to Dr. Gentry.
Okay. You all know I do this 3 times a day, and I'm always abuzz with whatever happened at 10 to 11 in the morning. And there are 2 opinions that were expressed at 10 o'clock that stuck with me. One is, oh yes, I'm sure that the grandfather is raping his granddaughter all the way through this story. It is Georgia. That was one comment. And the other comment was, in the state of Georgia, now somebody should tell me if this is wrong, in the state of Georgia, at the end, when the grandfather has killed his granddaughter, who's supposed to get everything in his will, the result in the state of Georgia would be that all of Mr. Fortune's children, including Mrs. Pitts, would inherit all the everything. And I had kind of assumed that that was the case, but it was nice to have somebody who's lived in Georgia for a long time tell me that was right. And if somebody knows that that's not the law in Georgia or wasn't the law in Georgia in the late 50s, I'd be interested to hear more about that. Okay, this is a story that was written in the late 50s. It's one of the stories, like Greenleaf, that O'Connor wrote shortly after she had published A Good Man Is Hard to Find in Other Stories. And based on some real stuff and some of what I hope is quite fanciful. It's about the building of Lake Sinclair. Lake Sinclair and Lake Oconee to the north of Milledgeville are artificial lakes. And they were built at about the time that Flannery was deciding to write this story. is that the starting point for the story, or is that just something she decided to throw in the mix because of other things that she had on her mind? Um, when you start to think about the story as being realistic, I think you have to ask yourself right away, is Flannery O'Connor Mary Fortune Pitts? You know, are the similarities between the two characters an invitation for us to see this as an autobiographical story? And the easy answer is, boy, I hope not. I hope Flannery is using her vivid imagination, and that she can take every little hurt she experienced in childhood and blow it up into something quite extreme, and that she's not really telling us about things that that she experienced. Now, in case it hadn't hit you already, the names in the story seem like a real hint to the reader. Take this as autobiographical. And of course, Flannery said she wasn't interested in writing an autobiographical fiction. So what? Okay. Mary Fortune, Mary Flannery. It's a name that's a family name that she kind of inherited, given to her by parents who were trying to impress a relative who had the money. These are all similarities, that name Flannery was a family name, and Kate Flannery Sims, living next door to the O'Connors in Savannah, who was, giving them some financial support. She wanted Flannery to use the name Flannery as kind of tribute to the ancestor whose name was Flannery. That seems kind of significant, and yet I want to say, oh, I don't want Flannery to be Mary Fortune. I want to believe that she thought about her enough to understand her and to see where the child was coming from. But I don't want to believe that Flannery is saying this is me. I should also say, probably pretty early in the game, that this isn't just one of the most troubling stories for me. This story gives me the creeps. I know it's good for me to revisit it regularly. Flannery's working on me with this story. It gives me the creeps. It's right up there with The Lame Shall Enter First as a gotcha story. For me, it's not a pleasant experience. When I was talking to University Press of Mississippi 5,000 years ago about turning my dissertation into a book, they said, your dissertation's too long, cut about a third of it out. And right away I said, do I have to talk about every story still? And they said, no, you can skip some stories. And I'd saved 25 pages right there. I'm leaving out A View of the Woods. I don't know what's going on in that one. And I have never regretted leaving that story out, because I changed my mind totally about the story. And I don't know if I'm right now. I mean, I don't know if I'm getting closer to the truth of it. I think it's a really confusing story. When I was writing my dissertation, I thought that the story was about Mr. Fortune and the state of his soul. And I was trying to figure out how we were going to save him at the end of the story, in spite of everything, or get him close. And now I think this is more like a study in damnation, which I don't think O'Connor does that often. and I am reluctant to see damnation in the Flannery O'Connor story, but I think this is about as close as she comes to it with Mr. Fortune. And part of the reason I say that is that I think, well, okay, even really his story. He's the person who is affecting the narration the most. We see a lot of things from his point of view, which is always an encouragement to try to take the character seriously and to care about him some. But now I'm inclined to focus on him not so much and to pay attention to what's happening to other characters in the story. And of course, the more I do this, the more depressing this and troubling this story gets. Now, before I get into all of that horrible stuff, I should also say that I've been given lessons about with this story, about how other people respond to the story in a way that's very different from the way I respond to the story. This is one of the stories that what Karen Coonrod turned into a Broadway show. I think it was off Broadway, but you know, a big time theatrical performance. And Karen Coonrod and her theater troupe go around the country still, and mostly what they put on, given the chance, is their dramatization of Everything That Rises Must Converge. The night I drove up to Kennesaw State University, north of Atlanta, to see their evening's theater performance of O'Connor, they did Everything That Rises Must Converge and A View of the Woods. And it was really great, by the way. What struck me was I've spent too much time with this story. I walk in and I think, well, this is going to be an hour of gloom and doom. This is going to be dreadful to watch because it's A View of the Woods. They got laughs. The people on stage were doing a great job. They were making the most of every one-liner in the first half of the story. Of course, once you figure out where this is heading, everybody sobers up quite a bit. But first half of the story, they managed to get a Georgia audience to giggle over bits of this story. And I thought, there's nothing like laughter in a theater. It seemed quite authentic. It wasn't polite laughter because we're supposed to be having a good time. I thought, these people really think this is funny. And I think there's something wrong with me right now that I've thought about this story so much and depressed myself over it so much that I don't catch the humor, and I'm probably getting a little warped about the story. I'm changing subject all the time, and you can jump in and throw in a comment or correct me or whatever. I still care about Mr. Fortune's motives. Some. And I worry about whether Flannery disapproves of his motives that are on the surface. Is this really a story that's telling us over and over and over and over and over that it's evil to sell real estate, that it's evil to build a gas station, that it's evil to build Lake Sinclair? And, there have been times when I would read the whole story and say, yeah, but all of that's bad. Everybody should just sit out in the woods and try not to hurt nature at all. And then other times I think, no, Flannery's not out to get him for that stuff that he talks about all the time, all the way through the story, about how it would be great to make some money and to do these things and to start a town called Fortune, Georgia, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That doesn't seem to me to be what Flannery is really out to get him for. It's the motives that are in him, that are in the story, that underlie those that are more about family. That's where the story gets really creepy. And I feel like that's where Flannery is playing gotcha with this story. That's where it seems like it becomes a damnation kind of story. Gosh, I've said that several times now, where that's a possibility. And to me, more and more, it's a story about family, and it's a display of everything everybody does to everybody else in their family that is mucked up. It's just a real dysfunction situation, and it just multiplies on itself at every turn, I guess. And since I'm still talking, I'll tell you about a couple of books I read. Story of reading a book that changes my way of reading something about Flannery O'Connor in some way. And these aren't works of O'Connor criticism. Every once in a while I read something that's not terribly related to Flannery O'Connor. But I can't read a book without saying, now, does this have something to do with Flannery O'Connor? Can I apply this? And darn if I can't generally manage to do that. My wife is a poet, didn't have a particularly wonderful relationship with her father. One of her poetry friends said to her, oh, you should read this book called The Drama of the Gifted Child by psychiatrist Alice Miller. So Alice did, and she said, oh, this isn't exactly what my relationship with my father was like. But then we saw about other books by Alice Miller. And so Alice read this other book called For Your Own Good and said to me, you got to read this. And I read it and I said, oh, this is like talking about something that's in Flannery O'Connor that has always mystified me. Okay, I'll get around to it. I'll bring this around to how this applies to O'Connor here in just a bit. It's Alice Miller's For Your Own Good is a study of late 19th and early 20th century German child rearing methods. You have to teach your children that they're disgusting and awful in every way, and that the only thing they can possibly do to be at all acceptable is that they must be absolutely obedient and loyal to daddy. And of course, Alice Miller takes 150 pages to lay this all out with long block quotes from all these different How to Raise Your Kids books. Makes a very persuasive case. Okay, that's what's going on. That's what was going on over there. Then Alice Miller applies it to writers. Because she says, if you're taught, I think this is fair, if you're taught as a child that you're terrible and that you must be totally loyal and obedient to father, what happens? You become an artist, or you become a Nazi, or you blow up someday and become a terrorist. The chilling statistic, I think she's writing this book in the 70s or 80s. I've forgotten the publication date in Germany. She says the majority of people who are committing terrorist acts in Germany, as I am writing this book, are the children of parents who have been following the old child rearing methods. Who are these people? The terrorists are the children of Protestant ministers. I think, well, I've heard about how preachers' kids can be, you know, a lot of trouble, but that's really quite extreme. Okay, so I'm reading all this stuff, and Alice Miller talks about how for her this explains the Holocaust. Oh yeah, that's important. It explains Franz Kafka. She applies it to Sylvia Plath. There are a number of other writers that she does a thing on, some of which are more persuasive than others. And I'm thinking, View of the Woods, as I'm reading this book. Why? The big puzzle in the story I haven't even mentioned yet. The big puzzle is, why does the little girl say, nobody beats me? She says it over and over and over and over. And even when somebody says, I just saw your daddy beat you. And then you tell me he didn't. And she never backs down. And to me, this is the big puzzle of this story. And maybe I still don't have a great answer to why is this. But when I read Alice Miller about if you're taught to be totally the obedient child, and that's the only way you can be okay with daddy or the parents, that kind of describes what little Mary Fortune Pitts might have been through to me. And I can see why she blows up, because, you know, you can only deny your feelings for so long. And she hadn't taken a creative writing class, so Mary Fortune Pitts is not going to really become Flannery O'Connor, is she? She's going to be Mary Fortune Pitts throwing bottles at Mr. Tillman's store and, you know, trying to beat up her grandfather to death.
Bruce.
Yeah.
We have a couple of questions. We have Chan and then we have Andy, I think.
Okay.
Chan, you want to start?
Okay, I have, I was just going to say one thing, but since Bruce is referring to Alice Miller, I have a friend who read lots of Alice Miller, so I've heard her secondhand. Are you talking in terms of her relationship to Flannery, though? This is my first question. Are you talking about Flannery's obedience to her earthly father or her heavenly father? Because I would say that Flannery's Catholicism fits in with complete obedience to the father. My second point, which I was going to make before, is it's not a mystery at all why Mary Fortune says, my father didn't beat me, nobody beat me. Because her father is not beating her. Her father is beating the grandfather. And Mary Fortune recognizes that she's the intermediary for the grandfather who he can't say anything to. So she's telling the truth when she said, nobody beats me. He didn't beat her, he beat the grandfather.
I think those are both perfectly reasonable comments to make about the story. And they both comments, both ways of looking at the story make me very uneasy. But I don't know if I'd say I believe both of those things at any point, but those possibilities have occurred to me. And I know that that's how some people understand the story. And, you know, what has this story got to do with religion? That's somewhere on my list of things. And you just explained how it could be. The most Orthodox Catholic writer of the 20th century, of course, is in some ways agreeing to total obedience. And, you know, that's kind of in the story in terms of religion. You know, about your other comment, I would say that I may have even written in my dissertation that Mary Fortune, thinks that somebody else is being beaten through her. And I stopped thinking that at a certain point because why? Because maybe it's from reading criticism, where I see over the years critical analyses of O'Connor's works and of this story, where we will take a little girl like this and we will give her all sorts of sophisticated adult ideas. I would say when I was her age, I was not capable of having such a thought. Oh, I'm not really being whipped. This is symbolic of somebody else going after somebody else. I mean, maybe I couldn't have done that. So it's hard for me to say that I think that that's what's going on with the little kid. I mean, before I move on, I should say, if she thought that, she would be right. That that Mr. Pitts is trying to beat Grandpa through her, and Grandpa is trying to get at Mr. Pitts and Mrs. Pitts, his daughter, through whatever he does with the kid. Nobody's really paying attention to the kid. She's just a soccer ball being kicked around by everybody for good or ill in here. And maybe she's figured that out.
I think Andy has something to add
Okay,
to this
here's another
discussion.
thing. I hope he did okay by that.
Yep.
Oh, yeah. I should read this. The grandfather is proud that Mary Fortune is just like him, and she turns out to be, in her closed off viewpoint, closing herself off from her perspective. Sorry?
Andy, I think you're unmuted. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead and say it.
Well, what made me wonder about this is when you were talking about, is this a story of damnation or salvation? It seems to me that both Mary Fortune and her grandfather end up in the same place. Is there a possibility for redemption for either of them as the story ends?
Good question. Flannery wants us to think about that. And, I'm really reluctant to let the old man off the hook. I'm really reluctant to let her father off the hook. I do want to put Mary Fortune, like I'm playing God here. I do want to say that this tortured child is not, in my perspective, guilty of much of nothing. She is so victimized that I can't fault her much. I mean, she just seems like victim, trying to make everybody happy and getting nowhere with it. She lets her I don't think she's like her grandfather. Okay. I think she disagrees with everything he's doing in the opening pages of this story, and she just holds it in and she doesn't say it. I mean, go back and read those opening pages and see, I would say that she never tells Grandpa that she agrees with what he's doing. She just lets him think that she agrees with what he's doing. The story starts when she finally says, I don't want you selling the lawn. I would say she'd been disagreeing with him all the way through the story, even up to that point. She just hadn't announced it. So I want to separate the two of them, okay? And say they're really very different, but this poor kid is trying not to tell the adults about their differences. She's trying to maybe make peace or just be a good little girl, just trying to make everybody happy. And it's impossible. but I think she's very unlike him. I think it's a total fantasy on his part that anything but looks make them similar. That's a strange thing to say in a Flannery O'Connor story, isn't it? Because the physical always matters a lot. Here, I would say the physical resemblance where we end up being told is just an illusion. Dorothy Allison, I mean, I see Monica's comment here. Has Dorothy Allison ever talked about this story? I keep thinking about Bastard Out of Carolina. I invited Dorothy Allison to come to an O'Connor conference one time, and she said, oh yeah, I really like Flannery O'Connor. And she didn't bring up this story, but I think if you, she knows O'Connor and, you know, sees her similarities and the extent to which O'Connor kind of probably was an influence on her throughout. And, you know, so yeah, let's make that connection. I'm going to go back and at some point ask Chan to tell me if there's anything more about Alice Miller that we ought to know about to, you know, connect dots, because I've told you everything I know and some of what I've forgotten now about Alice Miller. Another book that I have read in recent years that to some extent is saying things that are obviously true and obviously applicable to the story. And so I'm not quite sure why it seemed such a revelation to me. But anyway, Claire Raymond, who teaches at the University of Virginia, wrote a book called, let me get the whole title, Witnessing Sadism in Texts of the American South. I saw a title like that and said, oh, I've got to read that. Give me a book about witnessing sadism. Well, of course, this is a story about witnessing sadism. You know, that everybody knows that the little girl is being tortured and people are witnessing it. And this person is not, the person who wrote this book, Claire Raymond, does not consider herself a literary critic. She's very interdisciplinary, and she was studying all sorts of texts like photography and you know, other kinds of art forms. And she does talk about O'Connor a little bit. The idea that she applies over and over and over and over and over is that when you're torturing somebody, part of the fun is that you're sending the message to other people. You know, your focus might not be on the person you're torturing. It probably isn't on the person you're torturing. Your focus often is on all the people who know this is going on, and you want them to know they can't do anything about it. They can't stop you. And that's the thrill of torture. And you know, it's kind of a simple idea. It's really quite a chilling book, because she finds, you know, ways to apply her notions about torture in all sorts of places. I read that book and I come back to this story, and what happens to my head is I say, okay, so everybody is acting on one character, and what they really care about is how this is going to seem to another character. You know, that the idea that everything is about the witness. Every important effect is indirect, secondary. It's a matter of who's witnessing this, who's seeing this going on. And I'm not quite sure why, and I'm not quite sure I'm right, but I go through the story now and I see that, well, I mean, some of my conclusions are, nobody cares about this little girl. Poor thing, poor Mary Fortune Pitts. Nobody is paying attention to her. They just see her as a prop. That's one thing, depressing enough. And for some reason, I thought, the other person who jumps out of at the story at me as important and pitiable is a character that I had always kind of ignored. Bad on me, right? Mrs. Pitts. And now I did it again yesterday. Go through the story, and every little detail about Mrs. Pitts suggests that Daddy hates her. And he expresses it through ignoring her and through being nice to her daughter and through having the fight with her husband. And he just doesn't miss an opportunity to be mean to his daughter. I would go so far as to say that I think Grandpa is having the fight with Mr. Pitts because he knows that will be one more way to bother his daughter. And it had never, I mean, I'd only been reading the story for 40 years at that point when I suddenly said, oh my gosh, here's another whole nother way to be depressed by this story. Better go for it, right? It's another way for this story to be depressing. And so that's probably right. You know, it gets even worse. And I think Flannery is really just looking for how many levels down into hell she can take us with this one. Even if it is a religious story, you know, I mean, this is the descent into hell that we got going in this particular story. Okay, so that's my application of witnessing sadism to the story I've been thinking about for a long time, and I keep managing to get myself confused because obviously, I mean, on the obvious level, the way you should apply what Claire Raymond is talking about is to Mr. Pitts. He's the one who's torturing his child. Everybody knows it, and he's bullying everybody. And he's the bad man in the story, right? Because he would do that to his child just to play games with his father-in-law and maybe with his wife and maybe with his kids. Yeah. Oh, here's a comment.
Bruce, Fernanda has a sort of interesting comment about Mary Fortune.
Okay. I'll read it, Fernanda. Do you think Mary Fortune may be considered a saint because with her death, she saved her family? Do you think it's possible? Yes, she can be a saint. She can be a Christ figure. She can certainly be a martyr. And, well, different things get stuff out of Flannery O'Connor stories, depending upon what they need. I do not need to kill this. I do not need to see this child become a saint. You know, I'm perfectly happy to make Hazel Motes a saint. Okay, at the end of, I'll make Hazel Motes a saint easily at the end of Wise Blood because he's asking for it. And okay, with her death, she saved her family. Okay, if she said to herself, okay, I will suffer and that will save my family. Okay, then maybe I just don't want to put that much on that kid. I don't need for her to be a theologian and a philosopher and an ecologist and a literary critic and a saint. I think she's just a little kid who's in an impossible situation. She's victim, and her father doesn't want to. Her father's not paying attention to her. Her grandfather's not paying attention to her. They're making her into something she's not. And I think this story is telling me, let her be a little kid. don't make her into something she's not. If you do that, you're doing exactly something similar to what her father did to her and to what her grandfather did to her, and maybe her mother too. I mean, you want me to get puzzled about this story? The passage where mother says to her daughter, you put him up to every bad thing he's doing to us. I don't know, that passage, I just think, well, I'll never be smart enough to figure out that psychology. I think she's just got to be totally in denial about what's going on and unable to articulate, to come up with something that wacky. And, you know, for somebody else, that might be the key to it all. To me, that's a stop sign saying this is a story that's always going to resist your ability to figure out what's going on. Okay, here's another comment. Monica, you want to say it? I do not know the answer. Somebody surely knows this.
I'm just thinking that, I mean, those books that people of our generation grew up reading were pretty gruesome. And there's so many stories that I've read of like women talking about like growing up wanting to be, you know, martyred in really violent, gruesome ways. And I really wanted to see if I could find what her formative reading was.
Well, okay, and you can go back to A Temple of the Holy Ghost and know that the little girl in that story has the notion about there are all these terrible ways to die that lead you to be a saint and a martyr, and she's shopping around for, you know, if they did this to me, that would be okay. So she's choosing of how she could get killed, and it would be okay because of her religious training, and she knows that there's a role that she could play. And, you know, I've never read this, but somebody could apply that kind of Lives of the Saints training to this story and say, there's this saint's life and this saint's life and this saint's life that are similar enough so that we could imagine that this little girl might have heard such a thing and she might actually be thinking that way.
Raising your hand.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. You know, she loves the trees. Those are her saints. You know, and Flannery, you know, remember the letters where Flannery's talking to somebody and somebody asks her about who's the Christ symbol in the story, and somebody suggests maybe it's Mr. Pitts, and she says, no. If there's a Christ symbol in this story, it's the trees. Well, the little girl loves the trees. I mean, you know that, but I don't know about the symbolism of trees in Catholicism, except for the cross, that would, and of course, lots of people find crucifixion symbolism all the way through this story. You know, that all these trees are all about to be crosses. There's a moment where the old man is basically envisioning a crucifixion in the woods, and then he doesn't see the significance of his own vision. Does that mean the little girl is choosing it and consciously accepting that role? Wow. What a confusing story this is. Okay,
And
I only have
now
one
we
more
have-
idea, so I'm happy to go through.
Margaret Knight has an idea that she'd like to add to the
Margaret.
mix. And then
Okay.
Chan, I think, wants to return to the idea of the little girl as a symbol.
Mhm. Where'd you go?
There she is. You're
Where's
on-
Margaret?
You want to unmute for us, Margaret? I'm asking you to
I've
unmute.
lost Margaret.
There she is.
She's here somewhere. Okay.
Want to write into it?
How do you do that?
Oh, there you are. Okay, I see you now. You need to unmute.
And then I think Dick and Carolyn also have a comment they
Oh.
want to make.
She got me.
I got Margaret. I heard you.
I'm still.
There you go. No, you're good now. Oh, now you're muted.
Okay.
There you go.
Since the abuse of Mary was done out in the open for everyone to see, why do you think no one ever came to her defense? Even her grandfather abused her like her own father did.
I don't know. The obvious answer to me is because they don't really love her. if this child feels unloved, she's got plenty of evidence that, you know, when her father confronts her with her beatings, he attacks her. He says, you should fight. You should fix this. It's bad on you that you're getting beaten. He doesn't say, I'm gonna save you from this. And, you know, maybe there's a better answer. I mean, but I think we are supposed to notice that this is a big deal, that everybody knows that this is going on, and they've all come up with a reason why I can't do anything about this. I've just got to live with this situation. Okay, Chan's got a
Comment.
Yeah. Everybody's always moving around on this screen. So like, nobody's ever in the same place.
She's unmuted now. So.
Okay, go ahead, Chan.
Well, I was thinking about why Flannery's children are so unappealing, and you know, they're just part of the scene, like in the Good Man is Hard to Find, providing a bit of the humor and completing a family, just like the ones in this story. The only one we see is Mary Fortune, but there's 6 others sitting around the dinner table.
Mm-hmm.
If Flannery focuses on a child as the main part of the story, then the children are not really childlike. They are vehicles for her symbolism and to carry out the story. So I don't think it's unusual at all that Mary Fortune, that you can't visualize a 9-year-old, or you can't imagine a 9-year-old having certain thoughts in her head, because she's not a 9-year-old. She's Flannery's vehicle for doing whatever she wants to do. And as far as her family, why they didn't do anything about any treatment of her, she's their only hope. The grandfather obviously disdains and hates the rest of them.
Yeah.
And they're living at his, they're living on his property. He's their support. So if they have any hope whatsoever that he's going to provide for them after he's gone, it's got to be through her. So they don't touch the relationship. I mean, how many families have known what's going on with a particular child, and they let that child be the sacrifice?
Right. So I think that's perfectly fair to say the whole family has decided collectively, she's it. We're going to let what happens happen. And we don't want to stop it. I mean, maybe we can't, but we're going to let her be sacrificed. She might go through some bad things, but it's better for us all if she does. Now, I think Flannery did study child psychology and child development at GSCW, and that what she was taught was that children develop in this certain way. And I got a master's thesis on the shelf in the office that says that Flannery was trying to make her children act their age. And she was trying to make them be kind of typical. I mean, I don't want to use the word normal. I just use the word normal, typical, that they were displaying the characteristics that her textbooks told her to expect from children of a certain age. Now, I can still agree with you that one way to read Flannery O'Connor is to say all of her children are grown-ups. You know, that all of her children are so precocious that they might as well be decades older than they are, and they can be walking symbols. And, you know, I would say that is another valid way to read the stories. And then at the same time, she puts stuff in her stories that say, I'm being realistic. I'm writing about things that really happen. I'm trying to reflect reality as I understand it. And, you know, it seems to me it's fair to say, so, okay, give us a child. Let's see how good a job you can do of showing us a child we can actually believe in, you know, and say, this is actually a child. Lots of people say they come across a particular child character in O'Connor and it doesn't seem realistic. And so I'll say, oh, I will agree. Okay, well, that's just kind of symbolic. There are things she wants to say through that character are a little excessive, maybe.
I'm going to take the advantage of my facilitator role to point out that didn't O'Connor at one point say all you need to know to be a fiction writer you learn by the time you're 12. So let's
childhood.
let's go
everybody's a child.
Let's go to
nobody ever grows up in O'Connor.
Well, you don't feel like
everybody's a child. Or maybe nobody's a child, or everybody's symbolic. So that has nothing to do with real.
Let's go to Dick and Carolyn, and then we'll go to Linda.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bruce, you said a while ago you remember something from 40 years ago. I can outdo you. I remember something from 140 years ago, which is a story by Jesse Stewart about a grandfather virtually kidnapping, eloping with his abused granddaughter, whose father beats her. At the last minute, when he appears with the ladder to take her out the window like a bride, the little girl says, I'm not going anyplace. I love my father, the very father who seems to make her life miserable. I think this is more of a psychological story than we have given it credit to. The last comments, I think, are aiming in that direction. And I think there's quite a, maybe as the father of 3 daughters and grandfather of 4 granddaughters, I have a sneaking suspicion that there is more affection from Mary Fortune to her grandfather than seems to be. She could avoid any of the physical abuse, not to her grandfather, I might have said to her father.
Not to her father.
To her father, I'm sorry, I said that wrong. I ain't no psychologist, but that works for me better than any sainthood phenomenon.
Do you recall the name of this text by Jesse
No,
Stewart?
I never can remember,
Well
and I
done.
can't get it.
We're
And that's
all
for
gonna
you
be on
to
Google
do.
tonight.
You're the professor. You should know that.
Oh, I should know this, right? Of course. Hey, all you other professors out there, fill us in.
I think Stewart wrote only 400 short stories. So.
Oh, that's so. It won't take us more than 5 minutes to figure it out. Okay.
And Linda?
Thanks a lot for that.
I grew up in the South, and I saw this in my own family. I had an uncle who was an insurance executive in Atlanta, and he beat the crap out of his 3 daughters all the time. I've seen the man take his belt off and beat them up. This happened a lot. I doubt if it happens as much now, but what I came to think as I was reading this story is this whole family is unconscious. They're living according to the mores of the time and how women and children can be treated. And perhaps the most conscious in the story is Mary Fortune. She realizes she's got to play her role to keep what little structure there is going on here. And I mean, taking a belt off and beating a kid, grew up with it all around me. Never happened to me, but I saw it all the time. And Mary Fortune is, she's a focal point here. Maybe a Christ figure, I don't know, but she knew what was going on there and she knew what her role was. I'll shut up.
Thank you. I mean, thank you for the comment. I think we can lay to rest the critical comment that we hear every once in a while that Flannery sometimes encouraged, that her fiction isn't psychological.
It is.
When she said, she would say, oh, Freud's terrible, Jung's terrible, Jung's more dangerous than Freud. And then she turns around and she writes these psychological, psychoanalytic stories that are awfully complex. And then, you know, and then we got these Lacanian readings that come out from time to time. Yeah, she thought about psychoanalysis and psychology a lot, starting in her undergraduate years. The prayer journal is full of talk about the unconscious. I mean, she was trying to, maybe she was just trying to figure out enough to be able to write a story. But I think what she came out with was plenty complicated and sophisticated to make people want to write a bunch of psychoanalytically informed treatises. And so she's onto something. And you don't have to, you know, you can simplify or you can complicate. You can make it all what's on the surface, or you can make it all what's hidden. But, you know, I was right when I said I did not understand what was going on in the story in the early 80s when I was first obsessed.
And Jean has another reading that kind of adds a little bit of complexity to this.
Yes, okay.
Jean?
Oh, yeah, well, I think it's clear that Mary loved her daddy, and she was willing to let him even hurt her because she knew her daddy was trying to hurt the grandfather. So that's why she tried to kill the grandfather because the grandfather was trying to hurt her daddy. And Flannery loved her daddy.
Okay. The only other idea, we're almost out of time, I want to say, sometime we'll run over just a little bit, okay? Because we're talking about daddy now. The other ending of View of the Woods, page 190 of Habit of Being. Sally Fitzgerald writes a two-paragraph footnote at the bottom of the page, and she sticks in here an extra paragraph that O'Connor decided to cut off the end of the story. And it goes along with the notion that Mary Fortune really loves her daddy, and it, you know, would percolate into the story in strange ways. I have never liked this paragraph. I am so glad Flannery cut it off the end of this story, but here it is. I will do a dramatic reading of the last paragraph as Sally Fitzgerald reports it. Okay, this is after the grandfather is dying and he's looking at his granddaughter and he thinks she's one of the machines that's eating at the dirt. I mean, that's a really horrible last line of the story as it stands, but Flannery once had this additional paragraph. Pitts, by accident, this is Daddy, found them that evening. He was walking home through the woods about sunset. The rain had stopped, but the polished trees were hung with clear drops of water that turned red where the sun touched them. The air was saturated with dampness. He came on them suddenly and shied backward, his foot not a yard from where they lay. For almost a minute he stood still, and then, his knees buckling, he squatted down by their sides and stared into their eyes, into the pale blue pools of rainwater that the sky had filled. Now, if that were the last paragraph, we'd have to read the whole story as somehow being about how Daddy's going to figure out that he needs to repent and fall to his knees. And we'd probably have, 800 analyses of this story that say it's because of how the little girl reformed her daddy through love. And, the most I could say personally for Mr. Pitts is, well, maybe he just beat her body and he didn't play the mind games that Grandpa did. Maybe I can say that what Grandpa did is even worse than what her father did. And maybe I can talk myself into the notion that the little girl, loves her daddy. I mean, that it's not just being forced, but it's more genuine than her feelings for her grandfather. But still, basically, I read that and I say, no, 1,000 times no. That's a terrible paragraph. Oh, thank you, Flannery, for taking that off the end of that story. And page 190 of the Habit of Being, contemplate this thing sometime. Read the paragraph by Sally Fitzgerald that precedes the quotation from the story where she says, Flannery notes here that she meant, and this is talking about the letter where she's writing a footnote to, Flannery notes here that she meant to convey that the old man was damned. This is a rather extreme verdict, given his unawareness of the nature of what he was doing all along, and the killing of the child was clearly accidental. Sally Fitzgerald thinks that this is just a little accident we're having here at the end of the story. Ooh-wee, that's Sally Fitzgerald. No, I don't think that was accidental at all. I read the story over yesterday, and I kept noticing that there are stones and rocks all through the story, as if the whole story is just telling us that everything is heading towards this kid's head being smashed against this rock. Well, I see we're out of time, and I don't know how much y'all got out of it, but I'm totally fascinated with your comments today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good night, everybody.
See y'all next time. Okay, so it's 5:32.
All right, we'll see you at 7.
I have an appointment with a student at 6 o'clock, and I will make sure we're through by 7 so that I'm back here on the computer ready to
Start
talk some more
again.
about this story. Boy, this really is a story, isn't it?
And with that note, I will X us out.
Okay, we'll see you later. Bye.
Bye-bye.